innovation doesn't come from rule following. Innovation comes from rule breaking. If every time I break a rule or I build something out of bounds, I get trouble, right? Go back to like how we structure that space for boys, then I'm eventually going to stop because I'm just going to continue to get in trouble and in trouble. And there's something great about civil disobedience, right? That we should really ingrain into kids.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Graham Frey, who many of you may remember from an episode last fall. Graham is coming back on the show to talk about why education in America is more detrimental to young boys than it is to young girls, and the benefits of all boys schools. In today's episode, we talk about Graham's experience growing up in an all-boys school. We talk about why the education system as we know it makes it easier for girls to succeed and is detrimental to boys' self-esteem and development. We talk about why having a strong culture is so important inside of a school and why that's sometimes easier to establish in a school just for boys or a school just for girls. And we talk about Graham's own two sons and how he's thinking about how he wants to educate them and what's most important in their transition from boyhood into manhood. I learned so much over the past hour and a half from Graham, and I really hope you enjoy listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to the show on YouTube, please remember to thumbs up the video and to subscribe to make sure that you don't miss future episodes. Okay, let's dig in. Graham, welcome back to the show.
Hannah, it's great to be back.
You're the second person I've had on as a repeat guest, in part because I had so much fun talking to you, but also in part because I got so many great comments from your first episode. People really liked
Super
it.
kind.
So
Very
by
humbling.
popular request, you're back. Thank you for making time for this.
Totally my privilege. Had a blast the first time and very much humbled by the fact that people would be excited about the words.
Well, I'm also very selfishly excited anytime that I get to talk to you because I feel like I always learn something whenever we chat.
Feeling is mutual.
I don't feel like I deserve that, but thank you. Sometimes I learn things about like the culture of New Orleans and like Southern Gothic literature.
Yeah.
But often I learn things about education. And one of the rabbit holes that I've wanted to go down with you for a very long time is the topic of educating boys.
One of my favorites.
I love the way that you think about raising children as a parent and also as a facilitator in a classroom in general. Mm-hmm. But in our last conversation, you alluded a lot to things that were specific to your sons and your experience with different boys in the classrooms that you've taught in over the years and the schools that you've run. And I know your experience with this runs very deep. You were the boy in the classroom that didn't always like the classroom structure. You've raised 2 of them of your own.
Still in process.
You're well along the path, though. And you have a lot of experiences over the years working with boys in classrooms in a variety of settings. So we're going to go super deep on this today.
Great.
And it's going to be great. And I'm going to learn a ton. And it's going to be really fun.
I'll learn as well.
Is education the way we do it in America? Is traditional education more harmful to boys than it is to girls?
Well, let's take that apart as a starting point. When we think about the term traditional education, what you're really referring to last approximate 100 years, right? Maybe a little bit more. Because we know that education over the span of humanity has taken many different forms. Since education has become largely custodial, and the idea of a transfer of knowledge that is very standardized, it has been forced to approach a commonality between boys and girls. So the first place where I would start is that school has become largely transactional. I go to school, I receive a sense of knowledge, I take a test of sorts, right? Some sort of summative test that scores me, and then I move on. In theory, I have a base of knowledge or a set of skills. And the school itself, the school culture, isn't particularly strong, but it is, as I said, a transactional relationship. As you know, I like to think about schools in three parts: culture, program, and structure. And a good school is where all three of those things come together. If we look historically at schools, the most important component was the culture that they were trying to build. Most of our early schools, which were private schools, simply because we didn't have public education at that point in time in the same sense, were really defined on what it meant to be a good person. What were the values that the school stood for? And how did the child then progress from a young person to a person who's ready to go out into the world? I recognize that saying that today is somewhat charged, but most of these values are things that we would all agree upon. So that's where I would start when we think about what school is like. It's culture being the most important component, and this is something we've moved away from into a transactional environment. One of the things that's occurred at scale as we've become this schools become this transactional environment is that we have moved away from allowing kids to be kids, to the most basic point. And that means that school has developed into something that is largely easier for young girls to be successful than it is for young males. And so I would argue today that the common classroom, in the sense of a school at scale, it is easier for a young lady to feel success, a young girl to feel success, than it is for a boy to feel success.
What is it about a classroom that makes it easier for a girl to feel successful within? Can you break that down?
Sure. The starting point would be, we know that boys and girls learn differently. Not a very popular thought, but it is scientifically true. And there's some really neat anecdotes that show this, but we know that young girls are more verbal, more auditory in the very, very beginning. They're more inclined to read at an earlier point. They are less rambunctious. They are more focused on order. And that boys are the opposite in many ways. They're actually more inclined towards math at an early age. They are more likely to need space and use space differently. They're more likely to be distracted. They're less likely to learn in a highly auditory or verbal environment. And so if we just think about a classroom, I'll take a group of second graders, for instance. If the teacher is giving information verbally or expecting boys to follow a lot of rules, the girls tend to follow those rules and be engaged with the verbal aspect of the classroom, whereas the boys have a harder time following those rules, have a harder time sitting still, and are more likely to not understand what is happening in that classroom. And that means that as a result, they get in trouble, right? Because they're not sitting still, they're not following particular rules. And also, because the classroom tends to be more focused on verbal learning, auditory learning, they feel like they're falling behind. Even in things like fine motor skills, we know that girls develop fine motor skills faster than boys. So even in handwriting, for instance, those are all instances where boys can feel as though they are not as smart. And there's some neat anecdotes that actually describe some of these very early differences. I went to this wonderful all-boys school called University School. And the headmaster when I was there was a gentleman by the name of Richard Hawley. Rick became one of the founders of the International Boys School Coalition. And he has done an extensive amount of writing on boys and educating boys. I am not an expert at this, but I've spent a lot of time working in boys' schools, obviously raising my own boys and coaching and being around boys in that environment. When we were seniors, we took a class with him, a philosophy class that ranged. There's certainly some psychology in there as well. And he gave us some really interesting examples of the difference between boys and girls as to justification of like why it's important for boys' schools to exist. There were two that always, I always remember to resonate with me. The first one was that if you gave boys a blank sheet of paper and crayons, they largely drew explosions and rockets and it was almost like a violent sea of things happening on the piece of paper. When you handed those same materials, a piece of paper and crayons, to a young lady, a girl, they would draw houses, and things were very orderly. And so it was very easy for us as sort of 18-year-old young men to see this difference of like, wow, those two brains are operating really differently. Another example he would give is if you put 4 or 5 coins, quarters, in front of a young lady, they would neatly pick them up one by one. The boys tended to grab them all at once, right? They were just much more aggressive in their actions. We know that boys are competitive, that they're physical, and that they need that space in which to learn. They're also very apt to make mistakes at a young age and are okay with making those mistakes or pushing the boundaries. And unfortunately, our traditional system, in many ways, punishes them for them. So we run into a lot of parents who have a very smart kindergartner, first grader, who is in trouble a lot and is not doing well in school, with air quotes, because they simply can't sit still.
Does that correlate directly with like testing performance and grade level assignments, like the grading on assignments, their performance in that? Is there a correlation between what you just described and a boy maybe being more comfortable making more mistakes on tests and making more mistakes on assignments because in his mind, that's just how he's wired to iteratively learn, and that gets punished inside of his actual performance in his report card? Or is it more behavioral, like not wanting to sit still, being comfortable, pushing the bounds inside of the classroom of how much he can get away with before he gets sent to the principal's office?
Sure. A couple different things there. There's some kids who certainly will push to see when they get in trouble, and that is a reaction, right? There are other kids who are just simply existing. They're just moving. They're just living their best little lives. And that doesn't fit within the constraints of having a number of kids in a classroom where because of the custodial nature of school, you just need order. If we think about the learning that occurs, obviously, if the classroom is highly verbal and the assessments are based on what they're learning or being taught in that classroom, the girls' scores are going to be higher than the boys' scores. From secondary, boys tend to become, or simply can't concentrate for as long as a period of time as the girls can at that point, which is also going to affect test scores. There's a lot of argument that we can do of what the value of a test score is between kindergarten and 5th grade. If you've ever watched a first grader take a standardized test, it's a pretty comical moment, right? And so I'm not sure exactly what the value of those things are. And this is, as I said, largely anecdotal, as well as I've read a tremendous amount on this. So there's a correlation there. But if we just think about the way, for the most part, when we teach, a teacher tends to, manage their classroom. They're the one distributing the knowledge. They're the one building the assessment, and they're the one grading the assessment. And so it is going to reflect how they operate their classroom. And if I'm a young boy who needs to learn by doing, by physically moving, by taking things apart and putting things together, that may be in conflict with a summative test. And so I would say there is a correlation there for sure. And if you suddenly look at test scores that may not be growing at the same rate as the girls in the classroom, and then you suddenly also look at the discipline reports and you think, wow, not only are these kids not progressing the way we'd like to academically, but they're also getting into more trouble. They're largely boys. And so there's some sort of problem here with that group.
Is there a point where this difference starts to level out? Like, do boys catch up to girls at some point over the course of their adolescence or later, maybe post-secondary years, where this starts to balance out? Or are these differences pretty consistent all the way through?
I think it does balance out. I think there's a point when as boys travel through middle school and they get into high school, especially in their later years of high school and into college, where they pick up the reading skills, they pick up all the other skills where the girls may be moving faster. If if you look at a group of middle school, especially early middle school, late elementary kids, you'll often notice the girls are taller than a lot of the boys. They're just simply growing faster. Their brains are developing faster. That obviously levels out as kids get older. But if we go back to the test score component, or what's the real value in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, it's really learning to read. If girls are learning to read faster, they're more inclined to go through those early years with more success. But it absolutely levels out, as we see.
But how much does that early advantage that girls have set the boys back? If the girls are performing at a higher rate, they're intaking more knowledge, they're probably retaining more. They're certainly developing more self-confidence if they're consistently hearing that they're doing a great job in school.
Yeah.
Like their whole identity around learning is being set in those early years. How much does it hold boys back throughout the rest of their educations to be in a system that's not set up for them in the early years? Like, is there a ripple effect that you can see that carries forward through the rest of their education?
I would argue that there is. The first point would be the self-esteem. If I'm labeled as a bad kid or I'm struggling to pay attention, there's so much negativity in that. The kids tend to, especially boys, tend to follow that script then that's been written for them. I'm not a good student. I get in trouble a lot. That's the process. I've struggled to pay attention. I feel lost in class, and I'm not sure how to solve the problem. So I think that's one aspect of what happens. I also think you have to remember that it's sort of a model of whether if you don't conform, then you won't be successful. So there are a lot of boys who simply conform to either a stereotype or conform to whatever is necessary within the classroom in order to be successful. And that can have a negative impact on their ability to think abstractly, in my opinion, their ability to be creative. I also believe that sometimes what happens is that in a co-ed classroom, boys who are naturally open to risk actually become more risk adverse and are less likely to go fully engage in a curriculum. They're less likely to become poets. They're less likely to join the theater or sing. They're less likely to dance, right? They're more likely to follow the confines of or the pathway that's been created for them. And so they're less engaged in an overall school. And a good boys' school often will make sure that they engage the whole boy, right? They make sure that they're really focused on helping develop and expose kids to all sorts of different things and encourage them to do so. So I think there are a couple different ways to think about that question as kids pull through. It's interesting if you polled a group of sixth grade girls and said, "What do you think about the boys?" They'd be like, "Oh," they'd roll their eyes. I'd say they're so rambunctious, they're so immature, they're not taking this seriously. They don't listen. And that's not true for all of the kids, right? But it makes perfect sense. Or if you look at a line of boys and girls, in second grade, the boys are probably hugging and pushing and prodding and kicking, and the girls are just waiting in line, as their teacher has told them. And those are just really obvious, anecdotal points. So I know recently you had the Austin Scholar on your podcast, mm-hmm. and I had the privilege of sharing the same school with her for a period of time, and just a gem of a person, just a wonderful, wonderful human being. But I believe if you asked her to reflect back on sixth grade, fifth grade, I'm pretty sure she would say the same thing about the boys. She would roll her eyes and be like, "Oh my goodness, they're just dragging me down. They're just in my way. And I wish they would get with it so that I can go do all these, do all the things I want to do."
Do you think there is a significant detriment to the girls in a classroom when the boys are being rambunctious? Not their fault that they're being rambunctious. They're in a space that's not designed for them. But do you actually think it significantly holds the girls in the space back?
I do. I think that, a lot of the things that would be great for a girl's education also are great for a boy's education, but it's the mix of the two that cause some of the problems. And, girls need space. A lot of girls want to learn by doing. This idea that girls are not good at math, right? And get pushed into, which is all still stuff that exists, unfortunately, get just pushed into literature, reading, simply because they're adept at it at an early age becomes a detriment. Also, they lose the ability to, or some of the space to think openly, to express themselves. They may be just as interested in pushing and prodding, but when they see the example of the boy who's rambunctious in the corner, they go, well, I nearly need to follow the rules and follow this structure that's been put in place. So, and they may not be as interested as exploring different sports, different activities, right? And so I think that I think it's really important to understand that girls need that same amount of space. This isn't a point or a conversation or negativity towards girls at all. It's really more of a point of single-sex education, right? There's a great advantage to boys going to boys' schools and girls going to girls' schools.
Okay, let's talk about this. I want to hear the case for boys' schools and the case for girls' schools, and also at what extent you think that gender segregation is beneficial. Like, do you think that we would be better off if all girls went to girls' schools and all boys went to boys' schools? Do you think that there's a place for both? And what is your strongest case for it? Because this is a controversial take.
It is controversial, especially when you leave with gender segregation. That's a different way to look at it. I haven't used that term. Well, let's start with let's start with a couple things. One, let's think about this through a couple anecdotes. I went to a boys' school, as I mentioned, a great boys' school in Cleveland, Ohio, and there were a couple of moments that I remember or recall being truly formative. One specific was we had this wonderful 8th grade English teacher, Judy Danae. And imagine a group of 8th grade boys who are, depending upon how honest with yourself, some range of puberty at that point in time. Right? We're coming of age, and we are, there's definitely this thought process of like, how can I be cool, so on and so forth. But interestingly, in a boys' school, that ego tends to evaporate some, and you're much more open to taking risk. Miss Danae taught us Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet for us consisted of reading parts, right, male and female, acting out parts, male and female, bringing in actors from the local theater, where we would learn how to sword fight, where we would learn how to really dig into this. And you think about Romeo and Juliet, it's a story of love. It's a story of love so deep that I would take my life for the other. And of course, at the same time as 8th grade boys, many of us were falling in love or hoping to fall in love for the first time. And that first moment, we're like, I want to live forever for her, right? I'm going to take my life for her, right? We're dedicated to that. She was really good at making that all happen in a boys' classroom. That's really hard to do. I do not believe that would have been successful in a co-ed space.
Why?
Because we were enabled, the boys' environment enabled us to be vulnerable. And when you're going through puberty and you're in middle school, the idea of vulnerability is really, really hard. But in a boys' environment, it was just part of what we did. We were okay with making mistakes. We were okay with that vulnerability as we're traveling through this. We were quite honest with where we were as we went through this. And we were a tribe. We needed each other. We had a sense of belonging. Good boys' schools do a great job of creating that sense of connection. And so I would start there. And then we think about, well, how do you get there, right? And so the first thing I think that is important in a boy's education, first and foremost, is it's about the journey of a young boy into a young man. It's that classic, traveling from a boy to a young man, to an 18-year-old. And what does that mean? And what are the values that are important to that school that are then also important to the families that connect to that school? Second, it's about employing a group of teachers who understand how boys learn, some of the things we just talked about, the understanding of how to use space in a classroom, the understanding that in that particular school, boys needed to move often. And so the school actually built what they called the large muscle room, so that between classes, boys who just needed to I'm going to use the term roughhouse, but really just blow off some steam, could actually go to this space as a group and run around. It was like a little gym. That school had what we called field, but really physical education every single day. It wasn't, and it was a major part of the program. Every boy was expected to partake in orchestra or chorus, and so it was really structured in a way where the team, the faculty understood how boys learned, and it was part of everything that occurred there. Even into the examples of specific classrooms that, whether it's the Romeo and Juliet example I gave you, or fourth grade boys learning about whaling or history through whaling, and really digging deep into all the aspects of the science behind whaling, what whale oil was used for, the history that it was involved, the economics, and then actually going to the East Coast and looking for whales, right? Pretty phenomenal stuff. The largest space in that school was the wood shop. Every boy had to take wood shop. And so there was a part of, several days of every week where kids were actually cutting and sawing and measuring and building and taking the math that they were learning and employing it physically. And as the kids got older, where that became an extracurricular, if you walked into the wood shop at the high school, you would see a lot of boys who that's what was their connectivity, and there was a subset of kids who were just that's where they connected with each other. They're turning bowls and they're building things together, and that was part of their interconnectivity to that place. Another great example about that school, just going back to myself, in sixth grade we did a medieval feast. We studied the Middle Ages, which for boys, the Middle Ages are awesome, right? Because it's just conquest and war, and it's just it's a wonderful time to explore history for specifically for boys. Not that Rome and Greece aren't, but Middle Ages is great.
The armor in the Middle Ages is better. I've been told. I don't have the sensibility for it. I'm like, okay, it's cool, I guess, but I've been told.
Right. And we, actually, as we'd study these things, we would go to the Cleveland Museum of Art, and they have a wonderful gallery of armory. And it is just, you're just looking at these swords, and you've been reading these stories, and you've been studying, exactly how these things are built. And so it's not, again, this is the what I would call the nonverbal or the learning by doing pace. It's not just project-based learning, but it's really the intersection of all the different aspects of how a child learns in one particular place and how that time is used. And so we did a medieval feast, and it was so intricate. It was the culmination of what was happening in the art classes, where you had to create a family crest, and that family crest had to be at scale because it was going to be in the great hall. We had to rehearse parts because our families were going to be there, and it was basically a theater at the same time as it was a meal. We had to design the meal. And so all of us were involved in this. It wasn't as if, only, the best of the kids were on the stage. Everybody was involved in this whole intricate process. We had to be dressed appropriately. We had to come up with our own clothing. We had to be an apprentice. I was a needle pointing apprentice. My gut is that in sixth grade, if I had gone to the local public high school and been doing needlepoint, it wouldn't have gone over very well, right? I was also an athlete. I played football and did all the other different things, but I was super into needlepoint. Which was like a funny thing to say, right? When you think about boys, but that's that notion of giving kids space to be able to go do those things, and it really cemented the knowledge of what the Middle Ages were. This sort of darker period of time in our overall history. So that's an example, I think, of what good boys' schools can do. And then the bonds that occur in that particular place, they're multi-level. They're not only on the athletic field. I believe that all schools should do this, but certainly many boys' schools do, where you have family-style lunch, And family style lunch means that you all sit down and eat at the same time. You have an understanding of basic table manners. There's somebody, one of you, who for the week is responsible for serving that table, meaning they're the ones getting the food and bringing it back. They're the ones who are responsible for cleaning it and resetting it for the next lunch or for resetting it for the next day. There's this sense of that this is part of how we're interconnected. We have to make conversation. Those groups are decided, predetermined. So you're sitting with a group of random kids and random boys, and you have to learn how to converse with kids. You actually get exposed to or develop relationships with guys that you may not know because they're not on the sports team or they're not in the jazz club, whatever it happens to be. And those little things, I like to say that you can really see the sense of a school's health at lunch, but those little things really matter. And that's part of the foundation, which makes a sense of tribe, makes a sense of belonging. People joke about school uniforms, but there's something about a school tie. There's something about a school uniform where you take pride in that it means something. There's something about a logo and seeing that over and over again. And so I think those things come together that really allow for the basis for I'm going to use the term better, but a really good pathway for young boys to become men. And we can get further into that. I think the same thing happens on the girls' side. I have never taught in a girls' school, but I've certainly visited many that operate really well, and a lot of those same principles are in play. Giving girls a sense of belonging. This notion of tribes are somewhat egalitarian. I think that's really important. Divorcing kids sometimes from the external forces. Part of school should be this really safe place for kids to shut out what's happening on the outside and just really focus on what's important to them as they grow and the experiences they're having, and then be able to engage fully in their learning. And so I think that it's easier to do in a single-sex environment.
Today's episode is brought to you by the John Galt Mortgage Company. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with the John Galt Mortgage Company, which was founded by my friends Mitch and Tim earlier this year. Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they learned that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. Most real estate agents don't even know how much extra profit is baked into the cost. So Mitch and Tim decided to build a new kind of mortgage, one where they voluntarily cap their own profit on every transaction and pass the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. When I am on the market for a house, I will absolutely be working with Mitch and Tim. And if you are in the market, you should absolutely check out what they're doing and get a quote for interest rates that they can offer you. You can connect with them at johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find the link down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. You said that you can tell the state of a school's health based on
lunch. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Because it's a little bit of a sidebar, but this is really interesting. Yeah. And one of the memes about public school is how horrible lunch is. Like every movie ever made about a child struggling in school is like they get pushed over at lunch or something gets spilled on them or something.
Yeah.
So this is like very ingrained in the collective psyche. Talk about this.
Well, think about it in the beginning. Like we often come together over meals. That's how we as humans have gathered. And, Sebastian Junger's great Tribe book, I think you've read that, but, just think about how we come together and connect, or Sapiens, and same type of idea. So one is that when the whole school comes together, it's a really important moment. It's one of the few times, if not the only time, the entire school is coming together. So the food needs to be really good, right? And that's it should be something that the school takes pride in. Man, we had the best lunches. Miss Jolly was our chef. And we still, when we get together as alums, we talk about the food that we ate, right? We had like dessert every day. We had Salisbury steak and it was just great. We had great meals. But what you can see that happens at that particular point is how the community interacts with one another. How engaged are they with one another? Is there a social hierarchy in play with the kids? Where's the staff? If the teachers are off on the corner eating lunch by themselves, and there's somebody separate who's brought in who's a lunch monitor, just basically managing the space. How are the kids who are feeling marginalized? Where are they? Can they find their place? the social hierarchy that sometimes happens in a lunchroom. There are kids who just simply object from it. And it's their first time where they realize, like, I just simply don't belong in this space. A good school won't let that happen. A good school will make sure that every child has a place at a table, and that table is without any sense of hierarchy. And that's part of the culture that they're trying to build. If consideration is really important and kindness is really important, then you're going to make sure that every aspect of the day includes the facet of, or a way to express that culture and a way to actually execute that culture. And so I joke about lunch as being one of the windows into a school where you can see whether or not, how the kids are interacting. You can see how the staff's interacting. You can see how the kids treat one another, how the kids treat the staff, how they clean up after themselves. All those things are really an insight. It's really the in-betweens. How do kids walk down the hallway? How do kids react when nobody's looking? Those are the things where you can really see the health of a school. And then you can also see the staff's relationship to the kids and to the staff's relationship to one another. So I like that. When I think about visiting schools, that's one of the things I pay a lot of attention to.
I also think the needlepoint example that you brought up is very interesting. I didn't know you knew how to needlepoint. That's very cool.
Not very good at
it. You said that you felt like if you were in the public middle school, you would have been made fun of for partaking in needlepoint. What is the difference about an all boys environment? Is it the fact that all of you were being tasked with something for this medieval feast, and so it was a role that you were filling, and there was less to make fun of because it was less of a personal choice you were making? Or is it something about it being an environment without girls present?
I think that it wasn't about being tasked. Go back to my example on the in-betweens. I don't remember sitting at a table as a student or being at a table as a faculty member of giving specific rules of what happened at lunch. My rules were pretty straightforward, right? To be respectful of one another, to be, considerate, and then really pouring into the boys with that expectation of behavior. What I find is that if you pour into people with an expectation versus creating lots of rules, giving kids really to run and then helping them figure out where those barriers are, you actually get a much better result. And so if you go back to the needlepoint example, it was, sure, we all had an assignment, but it was also an opportunity where we got to go explore something that we were interested in doing. And we then had a bit of resource and the time to go explore that. And so it was, I think it was more so of, and everybody's was different. So the neat part about it was that it was really the encouragement to go explore something that was interesting. And because it was in historical context, I think that gave us a little cover, right? Versus a modern experience. I'm sure that I wasn't like, oh guys, I'm not going home and needle pointing every day, but maybe I was, right? So there's a little bit of cover, like, oh, it's a school thing, but yet it's interconnected to that. In my first day of sixth grade, I couldn't figure out my locker combination. I never had a locker combination. And I remember almost being in tears because I knew I was going to be late for my class. And a good friend of mine, who's still a friend of mine, Todd Kipp, came by and just looked at me, smiled, helped me with the combination, and then kept going. I don't think he said anything to me. And it was just this, like, I thought he was going to make fun of me, but he didn't. He just helped me. And it was just this notion that we're in this together. And that set the tone for my experience.
What is it about it being a same-sex environment versus just a very well-controlled, very intentionally set up school that's not nearly as expansive as a public school? It's more intentional in a public school. Why are there things that you can create in terms of camaraderie and culture in an all-boys school? Like, you've alluded to this a couple of times, but I really want to drill into this because I feel like a lot of people would come back and say, but like, couldn't you create that same culture in a multi, both sexes, like, joined environment?
So first, I think you can.
Okay.
I think it's very hard to do at scale. So I think it's easier to do in a school of, and I've operated some schools that are like this, of 150-ish kids, because you can create commonality and you can create, it's small enough where you can create very genuine relationships between one another. And you know every child. It's the classic Dunbar's number viewpoint. So everybody in the community knows everybody. And that goes back to that sense of it's not really about rules. It's really about expectations. It's really about understanding the values of the community. So I think that's possible. As you travel through being a young lady into a young woman or being a young boy into a young man, there are external forces that may shape your pathway. Some of those are positive, some of those are negative. In a world of social media, I believe a lot of them are quite negative. There are certain expectations that the society around you has for behavior, for the way that you look, and for how you manage or deal with the opposite sex, right? The expectations that come along with those things. All of those are complicated and hard. And when you remove that externality and you shape the classroom and the culture to match the biological, the neurological development of a young lady or a young man, then you open up the opportunity to build a really special place. And that's what happens at a boys' school, right? Go back to those, we recognize that boys and girls learn differently. And then we build a specific culture around those things. We build classroom experiences that are primarily different, right? We have a more verbal classroom, an auditory classroom for young women. We have a more open, spatially oriented classroom with engagement for young men. And then we think about the culture that we set that with everything around it comes with intentionality. That tends to enable a sense of belonging that occurs specifically at that place. And that's the differentiation. So could you do it with both? Yes. At scale, I think it's extremely hard because you end up making sacrifices on one side or the other versus pouring into the pathway that is pretty well thought through as from the standpoint, thought through is the wrong question, but really we know from the way that young men and young women grow. We know that every major religion, in the middle school years has, a moment of passing, a moment of passing from being a child into an adult, right? And most of those religions, even though the curriculum and the reading, understand that's somewhat different in their overall pathway, right? In Judaism, for instance, we have different actual terms, right, for both of those. And that's okay, right? That there's this notion that, boys and girls are different. And so I think when you create an environment around them, and so some of the things that you can do in a boys' school is you're more open to allowing kids to make mistakes. You're more open to kids taking risks. You're setting up a different scope of rules, which then fit into that notion of building character and learning that, which you would then, set up a different group of expectations and rules for young ladies. And that's the differentiation that it can occur. And go back to the intertwining between program and space. It's really important, right? The fact that the way a structure exists within a school, when it means you're intentional in how you set up a classroom or how you set up a lunchroom or how you set up an athletic field or some sort of even a speech contest. You're going to think about those things differently if you're setting up for all boys or a co-ed environment or all girls.
Do you think that you can do single gender education well at scale? Because you mentioned that you can't really do, like, the way we're trying to educate at scale is kind of harmful to both genders because you're kind of trying to.
Yeah. I mean, 5,000, 2,000 boys or 2,000 girls in one building. I think that's hard no matter what, right? I think that's just a really, really harder thing. It's easier if it's, if it's single sex versus co-ed. But I think that's a really hard thing to do. I wouldn't, from a professional perspective, I wouldn't suggest that anybody head out to go build that particular model. Mm-hmm. When I think about at scale, I more so think about lots of different options for communities, and so lots of different all-boys schools. Mm-hmm. I was just in Montgomery, Alabama, visiting Valiant Cross, which is an all-boys school there. And do I think there could be lots of Valiant Crosses? Yes. I'm not sure exactly how big the brothers think that it's going going to get, the two brothers who run the school, or how many of them they'll necessarily have. But the culture that they've built, which is extremely intentional and begins with character, is phenomenal. And I do not believe, in my opinion, that they could have done that in a co-ed environment. What they've done for the young men of Montgomery is truly extraordinary. And it's something that you have to witness to totally understand. The importance of uniform, the importance of faith for that community, physical fitness, athletics. It's as well as engagement, working hard academically. They've just built a wonderful culture around that.
Let's talk about some of the detriments of the fact that we're educating almost all of our children on a cultural level in schools that are not kind to boys. I mean, they're not really kind to girls either. They're not kind to anyone, but they're not developmentally particularly even appropriate for boys, more so than girls. At least that seems to be the argument that you're making. I want to talk about some of the downstream effects of this because there are many. What are some of the biggest ways that you see boys being hurt by the system or being sold short by the system?
Well, let's start with academic. If I am, and I think we've talked about this, if I'm behind grade level at an early age, there's really no way for me to catch up. So I'm stuck. And then that reinforces thoughts like I'm simply not smart. I'm not good at taking tests. And we have, there's some great books out there. Todd Rose has done a lot of work on this as far as, basically the notion of changing this concept of average, right? And so what we know is that it's not necessarily that the child doesn't have the ability, the young man doesn't have the ability. It's simply there is no, there's no pathway, there's no enablement within the structure. And so if you have a young boy who is doing poorly in class because he's simply struggling to pay attention and is not sitting still and is getting into trouble, we drill into them he's not good at school, and so therefore he does not like school, he hates school, and his test scores drop, and then all of a sudden he's stuck in a band of kids who are just excited about one thing, getting out of school. And so that has long-term effects, right? It may determine, if you're at the 40th% of fourth grade, I don't know if you're going to college. I don't know if that's a possibility. It also may mean that you're going to pour into, my only chance is being an athlete. My only chance is being outside of those things versus, well, I could also be in the theater. I could also engage in this, right? I'm gonna fall into that stereotypical place. So I think that's one thing. Second is in many cases, those kids don't have a sense of belonging. They don't have a sense of tribe. And so all of a sudden, if they can't connect to another group, they start to feel more and more isolated. And this is something that Scott Galloway talks a lot about the loneliness that occurs especially within young men. And I spend a lot of time on my own. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of negative, dangerous pathways that we can travel down if we have no sense of belonging, especially as we're trying to figure out who we are. Man is by nature a social being, according to Aristotle. Our system doesn't necessarily allow for that. It's funny that a lot of classrooms talk about teaching collaboration in a room of 20 kids where everybody's sitting in a seat and everybody's just listening and taking notes, and there's not a lot of collaboration, right? There's not a lot of interactions, not a lot of physical action. And so, I think that has a negative impact on kids' outlook on life. Life becomes a grind at a very young age, where nobody really knows who they are. They don't have a sense of belonging, not only within their fellow classmates, but also within the staff. They can't find the thing which they really enjoy, and so I think those are really two very negative things that can occur. And we end up, there are lots of discussions around this sort of like a lost boys generation, a boys generation where, where the boys are in trouble. There have been a lot of headlines for decades now about that. But what is then the progression of a young boy into a young man? Obviously, if we have these issues at a young age, they stay with these young men, and then they grow into men who have the same sense of feeling, right? Have the same sense of lack of belonging. Absolutely happens.
How much credence do you put on all of these headlines and stories about the Lost Boys generation? Do you think that they're onto something correct, or do you think that it's overblown?
Well, I think everything in the media is basically overblown, but that's another
okay,
conversation.
Fair point.
Yeah, I think it's just pockets, right? I think I think there are a lot of young men and young women, especially in their early teens, who are very lonely, who feel quite isolated. And because there are so many sources of entertainment and engagement that sit outside of being social, that they fall into those particular traps. And because there isn't a commonality, think about it. In many ways, a young man or a young woman can go through school all day long and probably not need to talk to anybody, right? They go to school by themselves. They eat lunch by themselves. In many of their classes, they're just listening to a lecture. They're watching something. There's no real interaction. If they don't partake in any extracurriculars, then they leave at the end of the day. Imagine going through an entire day without talking to another kid. That's certainly possible. And a good school wouldn't let that happen, right? Think about that sense of isolation. And I say good school, what I mean from a cultural perspective, right? From a classroom perspective, I think you need to be engaged with. And it doesn't mean there aren't great teachers who are trying to figure those things out, but it's hard sometimes at scale. One of the things about when we think about a really great school, what's happening with every child who's sitting in front of you simply by their facial expressions or maybe what they wore that day. And then in a boys' school, because of that sense of tribe, or a girls' school, because of that sense of belonging, that sense of tribe, not only are just the staff and the faculty, but all the kids know too. They know what's happening, and they feel much more comfortable in talking to that with the child. They see that as part of their responsibility of being a tribe and that loyalty, as well as talking to an adult of like, I'm not so sure that Graham's okay today. I think, somebody needs to check in on him.
There's also a lot of talk about the fact that the attendance rates the enrollment rates of young men in universities is declining very rapidly. Sure. That the incoming classes are very heavily female skewed. How much of that relates to what you're talking about with school not being a place that sets boys up for success early on?
Absolutely. We know, and again, Galloway talks a lot about this, about the data around number of valedictorians, number of women being admitted to university, number of women going to law school. We know it's larger than men. And I think that's just exactly down to this pathway, that the pathway that exists through traditional school in a co-ed environment largely supports a world that's been built to really enable young ladies to be more successful, and it really starts in those early years. And so they're better at going down the pathway that we have right now. And a lot of the behavior that we see that boys are just important to boys at a young age are simply just not allowed anymore, right? They aren't enabled to make those mistakes. They've been outlawed. Type of behavior has been outlawed, and so they just tend to get into trouble more often, and they are school becomes a place where they just simply don't feel engaged or heard or seen, and that's quite unfortunate. But we're going to see the long-term ripple effects of what it means, and I think we're seeing this across society now. Like, what does it mean to be a gentleman, right? We used to talk, Dave Brooks talks about this too, in both of his most recent books, Road to Character and How to Know Somebody. But we used to think about, we wanted young men to be acceptable at a dinner party and essential in a crisis. We wanted.
I love that.
Yeah, it's not my term, but it makes a lot of sense to me. I wanted the young men to understand. If I take one step back, I have 6 things to being a good person: that you're responsible, loyal, and considerate. You don't lie, cheat, or steal. If you can do those 6 things, I think you're pretty well set. And if you can walk into a room and know how to look somebody in the eye, know how to shake their hand, be able to make conversation, right? Understand that the room is more so about an us than a me. That's a really important skills. We do that all day long. It's not just about going to a fancy party. It's simply going out to lunch, right? It's simply holding a door for somebody. It's understanding how we interact with each other. It's saying please and thank you, right? It's pouring into people. At the same time, we wanted we wanted a group of young men, when things go wrong, which they do, run towards the problem. And I think that's when I think about the values that I want young men to have. That's what I want them to have. I want them to be the ones who stop and help the person, change a tire. I want them to be able to walk down the street and help somebody cross the street, or carry their groceries or whatever it happens to be. And it's less about them and more how do they support the people around them. It follows that old, holiday, ego is the enemy idea, right? How do I put that aside and do what I can for those around me?
There's been a lot of conversation about the decline in innovation in America over the past few decades. Peter Thiel talks about this a lot. It was part of the reason the Thiel Fellowship was established. The people at 1517 Fund who are backing young people who are launching startups talk about this quite a bit. Danielle Strockman and Michael Gibson, both of who I've had on the show. But the general idea, the general critique is that between the turn of the 20th century and 1969, we went from man's first flight to man on the moon. Insane change of pace and technology. We went from most people not having refrigeration, most people not having cars, like all these things being very newfangled ideas, to everybody's home has an air conditioner and a television. And everybody expected that the world was going to continue to change very rapidly. The future ideas of flying cars, and we're going to have crazy like Iron Man suits, and everything's going to be crazy in the 21st century. And with the exception of, the design elements of cars and the fact that we all have smartphones, we could be still living in 1970 as far as you can tell when you go down the street. And there's been wild innovation in terms of technological advances on a software front and a computing front. Like that, we have more computing power in our phones. There's more computing power running this podcast episode probably than got us to the moon, which is crazy to think about. Like, I feel like we're really underusing this technology. But, there's been a lot of critique around why there's been so much decline in innovation. And I don't think it's coincidental. My hunch is that it's not coincidental that this decline really began when public education really sunk its teeth into our culture. What's the difference between 1900 versus the late 1960s when things started to decline? It's that everybody's in public school, and everybody who's in the workforce was educated inside of public schools. I mean, there's many differences, but I think there's a case to be made there. Do you think that what you're talking about with boys feeling like they're less inclined to take risks and they're more afraid to try new things? Like you mentioned a lot of examples earlier in our conversation about theater and dance and music, but I would imagine this applies across the board. Do you think there is a correlation there between the lack of innovation in society and the fact that we're raising boys in environments that make them afraid to take risks when in other environments they might be hardwired to do so?
Risk is certainly a part of it. We are so limiting in what we'll allow young people to do. There's this idea that every child is limitless, and that's a great concept. But I think that's limitless is a really hard thing to comprehend. I think the starting point is that just let kids play. Let them do real things. Give them a hammer, see what happens, right? Let them break things, let them pull things apart. And so I think, that's something that's become really divorced from school. And so what happens is the projects in school are just lame. They're not engaging. It's poster board. I can't make even the stereotypical stuff like the old science fair stuff, you go through, it's like, I can't make a volcano anymore. I have to make a poster board of a volcano, or I make a PowerPoint about something versus actually building the thing.
The bonding experiment, or like make a tower out of dry spaghetti, not like building something real.
I mean, shoot, in Arizona, with this just wonderful teacher, Jim, and they built potato guns, which they had to figure out the mixture of fuel. They had, the classic bungee Barbie experiments. When I was in school, we built bridges, egg drops, we built bookshelves, we just built stuff. We did things. At the same time, we had this Mr. Morgan who's an unsung hero of the school. He finagled the way that we all had to learn how to program DOS in middle school. Now, I remember writing these little programs. We had no idea where all this was going to go. But he just said, this is just as important as what you're doing in the wood shop. It wasn't a replacement. It was just these two things happened in parallel. We had a sawmill. We had a sugar bush where we learned how to make maple syrup. But we were doing real things. There was no time where we were simply making poster boards or, sort of a presentation of a thing without being connected to the real thing. Now, if we couldn't, I think at one point in time, we had kids. I'll give you an example. We had a great middle school curriculum where we learned the connection between the city and the school and the history, and go to innovation. That meant that the kids had to do these in-depth study of Cleveland and then actually go spend time in the neighborhoods. And they had to walk through factories, and they had to walk through streets, and they had to meet owners of businesses and thriving communities as well as dying communities. I used to get in trouble with parents who'd say, I can't believe you're bringing my child into that place because it's not safe. But they got a sense of the history of the community in that, and they understood the role of innovation, and they understood the role of manufacturing to develop that city. And they had a real sense of what it took to create things. And then they could go employ that in their actual academic work. And so they were we gave kids the room to go build and try and do in the real world. And then that led to something called the Stranad Fellowship, which kids could get now. I think they can get in their junior and senior year, where they could actually get a grant to go build something or do something. That ranged from building a guitar to doing a water study. I had a group of kids who rewrote the Iraqi Constitution, during that period of time in our history, right, where they just read and they built and they did. And then they made a really bold statement, right, on what they thought, on what they how you thought you'd organize a government, moving forward. But that, so we think about innovation. If you don't give kids, if innovation doesn't come from rule following, innovation comes from rule breaking. And when I talk to leaders of either our Austin community or way beyond now, most of what they tell me that they learned in school is how to fight bureaucracy. Right? They learned how to fight order, and some of them just acquiesced, and some of them are like, no, I'm going to continue to fight this because I believe there's a different way to do this. They were comfortable with experimenting. Well, if every time I break a rule or I build something out of bounds, I get trouble, right? Go back to like how we structure that space for boys, then I'm eventually going to stop because I'm just going to continue to get in trouble. And there's something great about civil disobedience, right? That we should really ingrain into kids and asking questions. So I think part of the innovation piece comes from the fact that kids just don't roll up sleeves and do in the same way. We're just too risk adverse to allowing them to operate a bandsaw in school, or go play in the woods, or simply go run. They don't give them the room, as my good friend Dr. Leaney said. We just don't give them the room to go explore and play and fall down and get hurt. And the second part of it comes from it's just we're too confining in the structure and the order that we put in things, and so there's too much of a pathway. There's too much time spent on learning AP world history or learning, some curriculum. I don't know how you teach world history in a year, right? And there's no actual physical connection to that. There's no going to the Cleveland Museum of Art and looking at, looking at armory or go studying art and connecting to those things. And so you just don't see the world around you. You're confined to that classroom space.
I'm also struck by how much you remember about the things that you did in school. I know that you've made education your life's work, so you're going to spend more time thinking about it than the average person who graduates and moves on into something else. But you remember so many specifics about things you did.
Yeah.
And I think it's much harder to remember those specifics of facts you memorized decades ago versus experiences.
Exactly. If I take my experience and I compare it to friends of mine who went to an all-girls school or an all-boys school, they would be able to say the same thing. My good friends who went to Woodbury Forest in Virginia would be able to specifically talk about Ted Blaine's English class and how instrumental his English class was in learning how to tell a story and really understand literature at depth. Or Ben Hale teaching teaching grammar, or and go down the list of the different experiences they had. They would also talk about getting to boxing matches in their dorm room above the headmaster's, office, and not getting thrown out of school, getting into trouble at a certain point. But they would talk about those physical experiences they had that were just part of the school world, right? And so I think that it's about that goes back to the cultural component of making this a place where kids are learning by doing, which develops a deeper sense of knowledge, and then also, and then also the uniqueness of the experiments, the sense that we're all belonging, we're all interconnected to this thing. I think that's where a lot of those memories come from. Now, I have fond memories of school. I can't say that all my classmates necessarily have, but we definitely have the sense that we're a part of this thing and what it meant to all of us, and that is universal. And what should not get lost in there is this concept that this commitment to excellence, right? Everything that we did, we were expected to be fully engaged in, and we were expected to fully explore and pursue. It wasn't about necessarily having the highest grade, but we definitely had a sense of what excellent looked like. And I knew where I sat within we didn't have ranked classes, but I knew when I sat in a class, if I looked to my right, looked to my left, that both these guys were smarter than I was. I knew how much work I could do, and I was totally okay with that, right? But we were all committed to doing just excellent work.
I also find it interesting that you're referencing female teachers inside of all boys schools.
Yeah.
The same sex of the teachers is not important in these environments.
So 3 of my most formative teachers, Judy Danhay, who taught us Romeo and Juliet. And all I wanted to do in 8th grade was fall in love, right? I was like trying real hard, fall in love. And then Marie De Silva, who was my 6th grade math teacher. She was really intimidating. And she, I didn't do my homework one time, and, she knows it, right? She could tell, and she's going on and sort of asking me questions. And then she just stared at me and she said, when you decide to do the work, you can come back to my class. And then she followed up with me afterwards in her little office, and on her wall, she had a simple sign that said, "Think before you speak," right? And she looked at me and she said, "Talk to me about your habits." And I didn't know how to study. I didn't know any of these things. And instead of just ringing me up in class and pushing me out, she just came back around and actually gave me the skills that I needed, right? And nobody made fun of me for that moment, right? Granted, I think one of the things that happened at that school was that, and I think it happens in a lot of single-sex schools, you're really celebrated if you're good in school, you're good artistically, you're good athletically. Like, it's this well-rounded thing. If you're just good at one thing, if you were a great athlete and you weren't a great student, you'd be like, well, you should try harder in school, right? Something was pretty common. And then Nancy Lerner, who was our English teacher our senior year, we read Death of an Artist as a Young Man as by candlelight, right? She would come into class wearing a Trojan condom hat and pulling a little red wagon full of books, We would, she just was so good at, really creating an environment where we were simply ourselves. Now we had a lot of great male teachers as well. There's no question about that. But I think one of the myths that people think happens at an all boys school is that there is a true, that there's no respect given towards females, or there's some sort of hierarchy, that there's this thought process that I actually think it's the exact opposite. Respect for female teachers was driven into us. And not just not just an example, but just truly by these wonderful women that we had who, shaped our lives. It was phenomenal.
We talked a little bit about the decline in college enrollment for boys. We've talked about the decline in risk-taking, in creativity, in, you've mentioned many times, like being comfortable in yourself in an environment that's actually tailored for you. What are some of the other, on a societal level and also on an individual level, some of the other, of the biggest downstream effects and consequences of the way that we educate boys that are most obvious to you?
Well, you mentioned lack of innovation. Leadership is a problem. What I find often is that a lot of the younger men that I work with are uncomfortable with what it means to lead, making hard decisions, accountability. They're uncomfortable with making mistakes. And understanding that making mistakes are okay. They are uncomfortable with sharing feelings. Right now, I am not known as an emotional person by any means, but one of the things I've tried to do for my boys and for the people that I privileged to spend time with is create this opportunity for people just to share, because I need that space to share. I think that understanding what a good, healthy relationship looks like. I think those are all things that come from this. And then there's a practical part of this of we used to have this class at Alpha called Adulting that was run by this wonderful guide who happened to be a female. Can I still say female? I don't know.
You can hear.
Great. Safe space.
Something like
it was how do you change a tire? How do you hammer? How do you use a hammer? How do you basic throwing a ball, catching a ball? Some of that stuff happens because your family, your dad, but some of it's just that's part of what school, PE, physical movement, the importance that physical education is just part of what you do. Exploring literature, learning, so I can go on and on, but I really do believe that if we think about leadership and accountability, running towards a problem versus away from a problem. Look, I think you see it in the, this may not be a popular thing to say, but I think you see it in some of the online stuff that happens where people are really good at criticizing one another behind some sort of username, right? But are afraid to go have the conversation, aren't, willing to listen. That's a lack of tribe, right? Things become way too siloed. I think all that stems from the same process. I also think there's a value of work. What does it mean to do real work? I grew up in a steel town. I grew up in a place where when going to work meant you got dirty, and that was just part of it, right? It didn't matter, by the way, if you were, some guys were, some of my friends' parents were in finance, but everybody understood the baseline of a connection to what got us there, the connection to the factory floor. And I think a lot of that's gone. In today's software moving world, there's just there's such a deep division between what happens on the ground or what happens in a particular space and what the software that's being built, and the notion of picking up and helping and jumping in. That's something I think is gone as well.
Yeah, so much of the work, both academically and as an adult in the workforce, is very disembodied, very disconnected. It's not something you can touch and point to and get your hands on or feel as like you can't see it. You can't feel a sense of accomplishment. It feels like it doesn't really change the world around you at all. And I do wonder about the psychological effects of that, both for adults and children. I'm not sure I don't think we're wired for it.
I don't think so either. I think that there's go back to that tribe concept where everybody has a role and the sense of belonging, and in understanding the impact of my decision on others is really important, and having a sense of awareness around that, which happens in a tribe, and that can happen in a. I think it's easier to do in an all boys school and all girls school. That may be the most important aspect that comes out of one of these schools or the educational experience, right? Of just understanding that self-awareness, understanding that how my decision impacts somebody else, and being conscious of that, and then being connected to the work, connected to the outcomes. And I think maybe this is neighborhood, maybe it's community, but just understanding that either if as an employer or as an employee or as a business owner or a builder, an innovator, of how that community interacts and the responsibility that is there. Going back to that Cleveland study, I think that was one of the interesting, was that, those great cities were built by great families. Cleveland Museum of Art is free. It's one of the best museums in the country. Severance Hall, where the Cleveland Orchestra plays. Those community assets were driven by a group of community leaders who said, this is what we want our town to look like. I think sometimes we're divorced from that now. I hope that happens in Austin. You see it with some families. You certainly see it with projects like UATX, right? Where it's like, how do we give back to this particular community in a modern sense? It's not necessarily building the next great art museum. Maybe that's, but it's certainly understanding that Blanton is an important asset within this particular community. And that's part of the job, right? And so I think that all of those things are, if you lose the well-roundedness of an education where you're not exposed to art history, or you're not exposed to music, or you're not exposed to, great literature, maybe, you become singularly focused on economic gain, or you become singularly focused on some of these components. One of the things I like with a lot of younger people that I get to spend time with, folks that you and I both know, where there's this resurgence of we're going to read philosophy, and there's a resurgence of like architecture really matters. I get to go for a walk with a good friend of mine from time to time, maybe once every 2 months, and we walk through some of the neighborhoods, and he'll look at a house and be like, "That's not even architecture, right? Like, is that a real thought?" And it just warms my soul that people think like, okay, good design really matters, right? That's something that's truly important.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves is architecture that does not look like architecture. We could talk about that for a long time, right, especially in modern cities like right. Austin, but that's a conversation for another day.
But but before we finish that one, but there's that's part of growing up is and going to a good school is understanding basic design and understanding the importance of your role as a community person within in being involved with philanthropic groups, in deciding what happens from a design perspective, and being forceful. I'm very much a Milton Friedman in many ways, a follower in many ways, like live and let live. I totally understand that you should be able to direct those things, but we are part of a community, and it is important to make sure that we create a set of assets that we can pass on so that those learning institutions can continue to stress the importance of things outside of just financial gain.
I do think that there's so much that gets missed in what you just described when people talk about education and the expectations that they have for their children's education. They think very much about, making sure that you understand academics, you're good at academics. And that's such a small piece of this. It's like the academics
right.
are the cheat code, especially things like reading, writing, arithmetic, like the whole conversation around phonics versus whole word methods. Like, of course, you want to teach kids phonics because you want to teach them this base code that's running everything, and then they can go decode whatever they want. It's like they get the magic pen that they like touch, whatever in the simulation they're looking at, and it like shows the source code, and you can like see what's going on underneath the hood. You can like understand words that you wouldn't have understood otherwise, that you've never seen before. It's amazing. But all of that is just like a tool to understand everything else. But the academics are just like, they're just a tool to help you understand this world that we've all inherited, that you now have to learn how to navigate in and how to be a custodian of, but also like it's your playground, but you have to understand how it all works and where it all came from in order to be able to play in it. But I think so much of what you're describing gets missed in the conversation of, well, like, what are their test scores?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've changed. So many thoughts on this. Like one is that, go back as we started the conversation with talking about great schools that set out their, their basic mission is all around culture. It's not about academics. The idea is you want to move every child as far along their moral, intellectual, and physical plane as possible. But you want to do that in a place that's inspiring. And you want to do that in a place where they're known and loved. Like, that's the goal. And when you focus on that, you actually create pathways for kids where they can experience success. And they also understand, I may be a C+ student. Doesn't mean I'm not great. Doesn't mean there aren't a lot of things I'm really into. I might be a C+ student because I can't stop reading. And I'm going to continue to read and read and read. If we look across industry or look across everything, we find tons of stories like that. Kids who couldn't stop drawing, kids who couldn't stop reading, kids who couldn't stop cooking because that's what they're into. And so I think about it relative to, I need a basic academic toolbox. Math is really important. Reading's really important. Writing's really important. Do I need to take 4 or 5 years of French? Probably not. Do I need to take every AP that comes across the street? Better if you don't, right? Give yourself the room to go explore. And if you think about the structure of a great school academically, there's going to be a breadth of knowledge as well as the ability to go deep in places where you're really interested. And then we're going to go back to the in-betweens. There's going to be an opportunity or a requirement for every student to be on stage. There's going to be a requirement for every child to do a speech on something that they care about. There's going to be a series of awards that are based in books where when you discover that somebody's really interested in politics or really interested in art, that there's a book award that goes with it that helps encourage them. It's amazing if you give a sophomore in high school a book award, based on their interest in photography, they will start to think about like, yeah, I'm really into this and somebody else has recognized this and maybe I'm going to go explore that thing. And so, I think that that's a lot that gets lost. We get hung up on test scores and GPAs and all that nonsense. And look, it's never been easier to access curriculum. It's never been cheaper. It's never been more diverse, right? I don't need to go to school to go learn those things. And there's some really neat examples that are bubbling up about how we reorganize days. There's no right way, or well, maybe there's some wrong ways, but there are lots of different right ways to do those days. And what gets lost is, this is going to sound maybe cruel, but my sophomore year, I had this teacher, Pat Aliazzi, who I still keep in touch with. I still cannot get anything right for him, by the way. We email back and forth, and I will write something, and he will just rip it apart. He will just read what I wrote, and he will just take apart my argument and tell me I didn't spend enough time on this. But as a sophomore taking Western Civilization 2, right, which is Western Civ is gone now because we can't have bias, and Pat would, at one point in time, we were supposed to write essays, and he rejected all the essays and threw them back at us. We had to write book reports. The orchestra was playing Mozart, and he took over the class, and then we just listened to Mozart for the whole class because he said, if you need to understand what Mozart really sounds like, not like what was being played in the assembly, right? But those were all really formative moments. And of course, he was off the curriculum, right? The curriculum, the scope and sequence, which he developed, it was his own. That's what you have to remember about these great schools is each of these teachers is developing their own plan. They're not following, they're like, when I was a teacher, I built my own curriculum. I decided what I was doing in the classroom. I had this charge of teaching, U.S. history, but I did it my way. I would spend 4 weeks on the Civil War, and the guy sitting next to me would spend 3 days because he thought Vietnam was more important. Fine. We all had this different way of actually going in and playing. And so that's where a lot of that in-between came from.
Last question. You're raising 2 young men.
Yeah.
And thinking, I would imagine on a daily basis about the journey that they're on going from youth to adulthood. Mm-hmm. When you think about what is important to you for them to learn and to embody and the mile markers that you're looking for around, like, are they doing this transition well from youth to manhood?
Yeah.
What is important to you? what do you want them to know how to do, to embody, to be, for you to say, yes, this is like, they're on the right path to be successful as men in the world?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is that as parents, our job is to prepare a young person to go launch into the world at 18. The biggest mistake we can make is that we think we're really going to mold and shape, and that you have to let children become themselves. And they are from the very beginning, their own. And so you can have great thoughts of saying, I'm going to sort of control these pieces, but that doesn't work. I've always looked at parenting, especially my boys, as one, following those 6 basic principles, right? That boys are, responsible, loyal, considerate, and they don't lie, cheat, or steal. That's been the basic framework that I've employed. 2, I've tried to give them a lot of room to run and go experience and fall apart and get back up and figure things out. And so, I'm the one who's inclined to, when they call and say, I just forgot this thing at home and I can't do my class without it, to say, okay, that's not my problem. That's your problem. And let them suffer consequences. I am much more forthright in the way that I sort of parent in that sense. We're really clear. They know my reaction. They know where to, they know where my buttons lie, right? They know that rudeness is something that I'll never tolerate. My only hope is that they're engaged, right? So that they do those 6 things. They're really engaged in life, and that's what I care about. And it is, there's certainly times where you wonder, did I say the right thing? Did I give them enough room? But it's that engagement, that pouring into something, that is really what I want out of them. I don't care where they go to college. In fact, my older son dropped out of college. A lot of my friends still struggle with this. Like, how in the world did you let your child drop out of college? It's not my decision. It's his decision. He's living a great life. He's super happy. I've never actually, we talked yesterday, and he's, thrilled with what he's fully engaged in, and he's, climbing mountains and traveling the world, and he's really doing hard things. And he has a particular plan on what he wants to go have happen. He's having real world experiences, and he's reading a ton. So I'm super happy, right? And he's still got things to work out. He's 21. He still makes lots of mistakes. He still doesn't understand how things happen. That's all great, and understanding that happens. But I think it's simply about, as Dr. Looney, a good friend's father, said, it's about giving boys a lot of room to run, and then setting a set of expectations or baseline expectations, and then letting it happen in front of you. We talked a little bit about time, that sort of like too much control or being risk adverse. I don't look at my kids' grades. Never have. I'm not going to. I want them to be fully engaged in school. As we said earlier, I want them to be, acceptable at a dinner party, and, indispensable or essential in a crisis. I will tell you that, just praise on my boys. When they were younger and I was at IMG Academy in Florida, we used to, Bradenton's not known for its food. So we'd rotate through whoever had the special, and, these different restaurants. And one night we went to Outback Steakhouse, which was the big one because the boys were getting steak, and, they were really excited. And there are a couple stories that come out of that place that are pretty neat, I think. But we're leaving the table, and the server came to me, and she said, "Sir, I just want to say something to you." And I was like, "Uh-oh, what do the boys do?" And she said, "Your boys are so polite and so respectful, and I've been working here for over a decade, and every time you guys come in, I can always expect your boys to say please and thank you and are considerate, and that means a lot to me." Those are the moments where you just go, all right, something's going right. And there are all kinds of stories. In Arizona, we were running the school there. John Griffiths, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he had this great story where he would look at his boys and he would say, basically, I'm going off to do this. And he has actually a young lady, a daughter and a boy. And just, make sure that you're mindful of not being in a wash when it rains. And otherwise you have free reign. And so for my boys, I was like, there are only 2 rules. And number 1, if you pick up a rock, look first because there might be a scorpion or snake underneath it. And number 2, if it rains, get out of the wash. And then I'll see you in an hour. When we were in Dublin, when they were one was going to middle school and one was Colt, I think was a sophomore in high school. I was like, I'll see you at dinner in 2 hours. You have free reign of Dublin. Just don't go north on O'Connell because you get your asses kicked. Right. And that's it. And people look at me like you're in a foreign country and you're letting your children run around. I'm like, yeah, totally. What's going to happen? They're going to be fine. They're going to figure it out. And they have cell phones now and all this other stuff. Right. And so I think that's the way I've approached this. And there's a lot of things that don't always go right. But it seems to be working pretty well. And, there's still a lot of water to go. I just want them to be fully engaged. I drove them into an office park when they were kids. And I said, if you work in one of these things, I'm going to kick your asses. Right.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Because can you imagine just waking up every day? John Griffiths used to call it cockroach living. Like you wake up, you get in your car and you drive to an office park and you go up the elevator and you sit there and you get back in and you drive back out and you're like totally disconnected from things. By the way, I think this whole Zoom thing we're in right now might be a level below that, right? Like not even, like it's so Kafkaesque, like you might be just like a level really below that living. But go live your lives. Go be fully engaged. Go, use your body and explore and push and break and, and just remember that at the end of the day, if you're responsible to consider it and you're, and you don't lie, cheat, or steal, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to work out. So that's what we're doing. And I think it's going to work out great. And I think I had a lot of influences that helped me shape that part of their being.
Okay, I do have one more very quick question.
Sure.
If people are interested in some of the topics that we went over today about all boys education, all girls education, you referenced a few different people over the course of this conversation.
Yeah.
But I know you've read very heavily on these topics. Are there particular authors or books that you would recommend if people want to go a little bit deeper?
Yeah. Well, Richard Hawley has a number of books on boys, and he was certainly my mentor. He was one of the founders of the International Boys School Coalition. So I think that's a great place to start, specifically on boys. I'm a big fan of Tribe, Sebastian Junger, which was given to me by a friend. David Brooks' last 2 books, I think, on culture are really important and good as far as the importance of culture, especially in this shift from, we're in this very me, getting back to us and how that affects in schools, the road to character. Character as a big part of developing culture. Those are some of the places that I would start. As I think through this, I'm in this phase now where I'm really enjoying passing books on to my youngest son's friends as they're thinking about their summer. I'm like, what are you going to read this summer? And I'm like, oh, you should read Siddhartha, or you should read this. And some of the books I'm like, you should be reading this in school, but that's another conversation. But or here are 2 history books that start to shape your thought. I love for young people to read Adler's 6th Grade Ideas as it goes through that. But, I think there are some definitely there's some great parenting books that are out there. But I think most of these, what I would push is away from some of the parenting into the Rick Hawley from a boy's perspective, but also just think about stories, right? If you're interested in how, pursuing raising kids, I think reading a lot of really great stories and basic philosophy and helping kids access that, some mythology, is important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this. This was so great.
Thank you, Hannah. I enjoyed it as always.
It's such a pleasure. All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.